In this chapter, the robin is described as by Ben Weatherstaff as being a brighter red. Now, this is a thing that happens with a lot of birds in the springtime and in the summer, that they're different colors in the summer and in the summer than they are in the winter. Goldfinches in particular. Goldfinches are one of the ones that I've noticed. Goldfinches in the winter are just this sort of dull greenish gray. But during the summer, they turn bright, bright yellow. But in the meantime, it's like they're this dull greenish gray. And there's a lot of birds that do that, where in the winter they're darker, more muted colors. But in the spring, when birds turn to romance, they become brighter colors to attract mates. So, that's something that really happens, where the robin becomes a brighter red in order to attract female robins. Talked about the seeds. Now, one of the seeds that Dickon brought for Mary is poppies. Poppies are usually red, though he brought white poppies, which are totally a thing. And your Lolly and I grow poppies. I have some poppies growing, not a whole bunch, but these were ones that took a while for us to grow. We tried for a couple of years where we dug up the earth and we planted the seeds and nothing grew. And then another year, planted the seeds and nothing grew. And finally, in the third year, we started getting poppies. And the poppies have been slowly growing and spreading and covering more and more ground. So poppies are a very pretty flower, bright red.
Not all poppies are red.
Not all poppies are red, as I said. Dickon brought Mary white poppies, but poppies are traditionally thought of as being red. They are popular around Memorial Day because of a poem written right after World War I called In Flanders Fields, talking about a battle in World War I where there were just thousands of people who died, bloody, bloody battle. And then red poppies ended up growing there on the field where people died. And so you have these bright red flowers in the fields of green where bodies had been laying. So that's poppies. Now the roses. I have a couple of rose bushes, and I don't tend them very well. I admit that, and they've mostly suffered from benign neglect. But they still grow. They still produce roses, and I prune them occasionally. I probably need to do a fairly serious pruning and some fertilizing of them, but it'll probably be in the springtime. But roses are related to apples, and the flowers have a five-sided symmetry, which is kind of difficult to tell because you have all of these different leaves, all of these different petals around the flower. But the rose has a five-sided symmetry. And it's, as I said, it's related to the apple. So if you cut an apple across, you can look and you can see a five-pointed star, just like the 5 points of a rose. And there are actually people who have grafted roses onto apple trees. So you have these trees with roses growing off of them, complete with thorns. But then in the summer and fall, you have apples growing on the trees, which is kind of cool. So apples and roses are related. And roses, like apples, don't really grow true to seed. So if you get rose seeds and plant them, what you get will probably look nothing like what you planted. And what they do with roses is they graft them. So when you graft a plant, you take a branch off of one and you put it onto the root of something else. So if you have this nice hardy rootstock that just grows, it doesn't matter what the top of the plant looks like. As long as the rootstock is something hardy and lives in the soil, then you cut the top of the rootstock and you cut a branch off of another plant and you stick it in. And what happens is the two of them grow together into one plant, so that you have the root of one and the top of another. And this is done a lot, as I said, with roses, because they don't grow true to seed, and apples, they don't grow true to seed. So you have a whole bunch of trees, all of these apple trees that have a rootstock that isn't really an apple. It might be a hawthorn, it might be an apple, it probably isn't a rose, but you have all these trees that have this root that isn't really them. But that's normal. That's one of the things that they do with roses. That's one of the things that they do with grapes. And there's an interesting story about the grapes and grafting. So there's diseases on different continents that don't exist on the others. And sometimes when they hop from one continent to another, they wipe things out. Like the American chestnut has been almost completely wiped out. It was all over the place. Beautiful tree, great wood, great nuts, just an incredible tree. But Japanese chestnuts were brought over to the US for ornamental purposes, and with them came a fungus. And the fungus ended up killing off almost all of the American chestnuts. There are a few places where they still grow. There's a few lone survivors of this great die-off, and they're working on breeding them and getting them back. But for the most part, they've been wiped out. Now, there was a fungus that came from North America and went into Europe. And this fungus grew on grapevines. So what happened was all of these great European grapevines were dying off. But what they did was they took American rootstock, which was immune to the fungus, and they planted the European grapes onto the American rootstock. So most of the European grapes, almost all of them, actually have an American root at the base of them. But the vines that grow up are European. When the whole process was reversed 100 years before, where there were these American grapevines that were just kind of, and they took these wonderful European varieties and grafted them on, so you get great spread. You have the sweet grapes, you have the different flavors, and they brought European stock over and grafted onto American vines, and then eventually they took the American roots and moved them over to Europe. So it's really kind of weird, but it's also kind of cool that such things are done. And she met Dickon, and Dickon was just like described. The animals just loved him, and he moved quietly. And that was something else that Mary practiced, because she practiced moving quietly because she was afraid that Ben would sneak up on her. Now, when I was a kid, little kid, I stomped around. Boom, 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 boom. And I got yelled at for it. It's like, you need to move more quietly. So, although I'm a largish person, I move relatively quietly and relatively subtly. But a little kid? Oh, totally. If you practice moving quietly when you're small and you get good at it, you're invisible. That's like the hobbits from Lord of the Rings. They're like, hey, we'll take Frodo as a burglar, or Bilbo as a burglar in The Hobbit. And everyone was, oh, he's a hobbit. Hobbits can move quietly. And yeah, hobbits can move quietly partially because they're small, but all it takes is a little bit of intention. Watch how you plant your feet, and you can move quietly. But anyway, so Dickon moved quietly, spoke quietly. The animals liked him. And Mary showed him her most precious secret, the garden. And so he's going to hopefully keep it a secret and help her grow things in it. There's already things coming up. Daffodils are some of the first things that always pop up. Daffodils are like one of the first signs of spring, and you often see them poking up through the snow. So there will be snow on the ground, and you'll have these shoots of daffodils coming up through the snow, which is really kind of cool to see.